It's nice to see so many faces here. My name is Tom Lonsborough. I'm the Certified Ableton Trainer at Manchester MIDI School. This workshop is called Deconstructing a Track in Live, which basically means I'm going to try and cram as much information into an hour and a half as possible. The order of service is, first of all, I just want to show you how to map out an arrangement of a track, maybe one of your favourite tracks, and this aids with structuring your own music when you're writing your own music. Next up, I'm going to do a little bit of work on impulse and how to apply grooves and turning off quantization so you can shift notes a little bit to create a nice big snarey clap sound, and maybe a bit of a look at Live's new glue compressor on a drum subgroup. Then a little bit of sound design. We're going to take a listen to the bass instrument that's used in this track that I've used as an example. I'm going to try and create that from scratch with analog. Next up, I want to take a look at quite a popular technique at the moment, which is taking a female vocal and maybe pitching it down and making it sound a little bit more masculine. Next up, we have a bit more sound design. I'm going to take another one of the synthesizers in the track and again try and create that from scratch using analog. Next point, a tiny bit of music theory just to get you started. If you are finding it difficult to write bass lines, lead lines, that sort of thing, there's a couple of really handy starting points from which you can then develop ideas from that. And then 7.7, I'm going to take a look at what I call linking sounds, the sounds that gel the different musical phrases together or introduce one section of music after another. So there's a lot to get through. I'm going to try and get through as much of that as possible. At any point, if you want to ask any questions, stop me, ask me to go through something again, please feel free to shout out. And there'll be time for questions at the end as well. We're allowed to run over a little bit, and I fully intend to. So, the first point, what you're looking at here is I've taken a track that I'm particularly fond of at the moment. It's by a guy called Maxi Sound System. I don't know if you've heard of him, but the track is typical of the quite popular deep house sound that's around at the moment. People like Maya Jane Coles, that sort of thing. This is taken from a Future Boogie Recordings compilation, which again I've got it on the stereo on repeat at the moment. So this is just an ordinary track that I've imported into Arrangement View. I've time warped it so it fits the musical timeline. Thereafter, what I've done, everything else that you can see there is a MIDI track. And on that MIDI track are MIDI clips, but at the moment these are blank MIDI clips. There's nothing on these MIDI clips. What I've done is I've listened through to this track, listening out for one instrument at a time. So this mapping process has taken me maybe 2 or 3 hours. So I'm sick to death of this track now, I'm never going to listen to it again. But let's take the drums for example. Every time an instrument enters or leaves the piece of music, I've created a blank MIDI clip for it. So for example, for the first 8 bars of this track, the drums, there's a kick on the downbeat of the bar, there's a clap on the 2nd and 4th beat of the bar, there's a hat on the 1st and 3rd offbeat, and there's an open hat on the 2nd beat of the bar, if that makes sense. So every time an instrument enters the piece of music, for example, the bass makes itself apparent at bar 17. So I've just made myself a blank MIDI clip there to represent that. So what I'm going to do, just for illustration purposes, like I say, if you drop me your email at the end, I will quite happily send you this blueprint that I've made for a piece of music. And what you can then do is delete the Maxi Sound System track altogether, and what you're left with is a blueprint into which you can put your own ideas. So on the drums track, you might load an impulse or a drum rack and create yourself some drums that are maybe not exactly copying where he's brought the kick in, where he's taken the kick out, but so you get an idea of how the track progresses over a period of time. You can also replace these blank MIDI tracks with audio tracks. As soon as you drop a piece of audio onto a MIDI track that has no instrument loaded onto it, it becomes an audio track anyway. So in the case of, for example, this sound that I've called cha-cha-cha, if you found an audio sample that goes cha-cha-cha, you can just drag and drop that over that, and it will become an audio track. So anyway, the first thing that I'd like to do is undelete that Maxi Sound System track. I'm going to zoom in, I'm going to tell Live to follow the arrangement. I'm going to play it through. Can everyone sort of roughly see what I've called each track there? Yeah? Don't worry, like I say, drop me your email, I'll send you the project over. But let's have a listen through to this piece of music and try and identify, like for example, here's where some noise comes in. See if you can hear all the noises that I've heard in this track and mapped out accordingly. So we start out with some quite simple drums and this Vox sample that's just going like that. That little random noise thing that comes in there. This red part here indicates a little drum fill. Now the kick drum is now on each beat of the bar. The bass is in, still got that vocal sample in the background. There's another fill coming up here, this red section. And then we get the addition of the synth. Another vocal sample coming in here. And now we've got the 16th 808 style rim pattern. Another little bass drum fill on the go. What you start to notice is that something is happening minimum every 8 bars. There is something different happening every 8 bars. Main vocal. Another little roll. So that every 8 bars there is something different happening. Now I've got another little synth added. It's this this part here. If you listen, that. Can you hear the cha-cha-cha-cha in the background? Listen. And we get the addition of a third synth now, which slowly fades in over these 8 bars. You can just hear it coming in now, a nice smooth pad. Now the kick's dropped out, and so on and so forth. We'll leave it there, but what I'm trying to achieve by showing you this, is that upon first listen to the piece of music as a whole, and if you're not trying to pick out the individual sounds, it can appear quite complex. But hopefully you can see that when you break it down, there's really not that much on the go. For example, the noises and the crash cymbal, you can just pick those out of a sample pack, just drop them in at the appropriate point on the arrangement. The vocal samples, it's just repeating patterns. That sample just permeates through the whole track. And you've got this main, whatever's meant to be lyric, that again permeates through the whole track. But again, just picked out of a sample pack, manipulated slightly, and just make sure that something different happens every 8 bars. That could be, for example, that double kick, like that. Or it could be that you drop it out and put a sample of someone coughing in there for half a bar. But as long as something different happens every 8 bars, that's what keeps the listener's attention. The other thing that keeps listeners' attention is, you might have, or you might not have noticed, we're going to go into it in a little bit, is that musically it's very, very simple. It's very simple. Where the interest is kept is on this synth here, I was going to solo it then, but obviously you can't solo the synth because it's part of a full track. But if you listen to the journey that this synth is taken on, it's that one. Basically, filters it up, filters it down, low pass filter with a bit of resonance, and it just keeps the interest, that modulation. So, electronic music, I'm going to go out on a limb and say electronic music as a whole, dance music, if you want to call it that, is musically often quite simple, but where you keep the interest is by modulating parameters on your instrument. So there is your blueprint for a piece of music. We'll leave it there. What I'd like to do now is just look at some of these sounds and see how you can achieve them. Let's start off with some drums. So I'm going to go back through to session view. I'm just going to zoom out a little bit so I've got a bit more screen space, a bit more claustrophobic. And I'm going to start recording the screenflow, which I should have done at the start. There we go. Right. Well, some of you might have noticed we're looking at Live 9 now. Brand new browser section here. Pretty much does exactly the same thing as before, it just looks a little bit different. So I'm going to select instruments and impulse. If I just double click, it will make me a new MIDI track and populate that MIDI track with the impulse, but I'm just going to create myself a new MIDI track just so I know where it is, drag and drop it on like that. So I take it everyone's used impulse, yeah? Impulse, the basic drum machine that comes with Live, or rather sample player. More often than not, you use it to trigger drum samples, but you can drop any audio sample in there that you want. So audio samples, you find those slightly differently in Live 9's browser. The great thing is, before you could bookmark folders and you would have to go to the menu at the top to select your bookmark, whereas now your bookmarks down the side here, drum sample folders. But to create these folders, all you have to do is, say you want your movie dialogue folder, you're always accessing that, you want quick access to it. Rather than having to go through this rigmarole every time, you can just, where is it there, just get hold of it, drag it out into the browser and it becomes its own little bookmark straight away. So making drum kits, the first and most important thing in my opinion is good sample selection. So make sure that you're using high quality samples. I am picking samples out of a folder called Vengeance House. Vengeance do really good high quality samples. They are split into different drums. We've got kick drums, that'll do. I'm just going to drag and drop that into impulse. Let's just get a 4/4 kick going. Just going to mute the Maxi Sound System track. You could layer that up with another kick if you wanted to, but I'm just going to leave that as it is for now. You need to get a clap and a snare on the go. Maybe 2 claps and a snare, let's be greedy. That's a good one. So 1. Yeah, that's a nice one. That'll do. Generally, I like to layer up a snare and a clap because the snare gives you sort of the lower mid-end punch around the sort of 200 hertz mark, maybe a little bit higher. The clap gives you a nice sort of bright top end. So, let's just program some claps and snares. So, kick drum on each beat of the bar, snare or clap or both on the 2nd and 4th beat of the bar, and finally, let's just add a hat to that. So I'm going to go into cymbals folder, closed hat will do. Quite like that one. It's more of a shaker almost, but that'll do. And then I'm just going to put that on the offbeat. So the offbeat is halfway between the beat, basically. So hopefully, I'll put it in the right slot. There we go. Now the output of Impulse is always really hot for some reason. I don't know why they've designed it like this, but notice how the individual channel fader is venturing into the orange. Now on the individual channel fader that's not a problem, but then if you've got too many channels like that, when they get summed up at the master fader, your master fader is going to overload, and that's not good. So what I tend to do on Impulse is just nudge the output down, before I've done anything else, nudge the output down by about 12 dB, and now you're sort of safely in the green. What you find is with drum rack the opposite is true, unfortunately. You have to bump everything up, but Impulse, just turn it down. That's the overall global volume control. Now at the moment, there's two things we need to do to that drum loop, in my opinion, to make it sound a little bit less wooden. One is apply some sort of groove, and the other is to sit it in an ambient environment using reverb. At the moment it's dry as a bone and it just, yeah, it doesn't sound that good. So first thing we're going to do is apply a groove. Now we can do this manually, or we can do it using Live's groove functionality. Just going to turn the hat down a little bit. I'm going to take one of those claps and pan it over that way a little bit. There we go. I'm going to take the other clap and pan it over that way a little bit. So rather than having everything panned straight down the middle, generally speaking, kick drum, snare, you want down the middle, but thereafter, if you've got sounds with similar frequency content, two of them, you could pan one that far left, one that far right, just to give a little bit of stereo width.
Can you just show us how to do that again?
Sure. You can do it on the Impulse device. Each slot has its own pan control there. So if I click on the kick drum, you can see that these set of controls now become relevant to the kick. That's still pan dead center, but if we move over to that clap, you can see I've panned one of them over to the right a little bit, and one of them over to the left a little bit. These three controls down the far right hand side, they're global controls. These are all relevant to whichever slot you've got selected. So first up, I'm going to manually add, not groove as such, but just add a little bit of a timing error. And I can do this by right clicking in the note editor and turning the grid off. Now what I'm going to do is turn the little headphone button on so I can hear the sound. One set of claps, I'm going to get hold of them, I'm going to move them slightly forward. One set of claps, I'm going to get them and move them slightly back. And we're going to hear the difference between these now. So this is with me artificially adding a bit of a timing error. Maybe go even further than that. There we go. So that's after, and this is before. Everything's very rigid and robotic. And afterwards, you're getting that lazy feel to it. Now obviously, that is just a bar in length at the moment, and even though I've added that timing error, it's still very regular because it's happening to every note. So what you might want to do is, nice little segue into one of Live's new features, you've got the option of duplicating the loop in the notes box. So when I do that, straight away that becomes 2 bars, 4 bars, and what I can then go in and do is just adjust each of those notes to a different amount, maybe push the snare back, blah, blah, blah. Just tiny amounts, but it makes all the difference. Let's have a listen to that now. So that one's a bit severe. Yeah, that was a bit too late there, but you get the general idea. It's quite an important and yet fundamental tool. For the sort of music that I like writing, like the deep house stuff, the disco stuff, you need a bit of a timing error in there just to inject a bit of humanness into it. So that's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it, let me just quantize those notes again. Select all, Command A, just quantize them to the 16th, so now we're back to very rigid. The other way we can do this is using Live's groove functionality. So I'm just going to shrink the note editor down a little bit, open the groove pool. No grooves in there at the moment. You'll find, I've just realised I've no idea where the grooves are in Live 9. Let's have a look. No matter though, no matter. What we can do.
Can you just right click on the groove pool and go browse groove library? Yeah, there.
Hold on. Oh, of course, it's in the default pack. The default pack is basically the library, so you've got all your default clips in there, lessons, samples, everything like that. So, swings and grooves. You've got things like grooves from Akai's MPC series. I'm going to jump into the hip hop folder. Now, does everyone know what a groove is? Anyone, just stick your hand up if you're not entirely sure. Oh, brilliant. So I'm teaching you all how to suck eggs here. I'm going to do it anyway. Right. I'm going to get hold of this groove. I'm going to drop it onto the impulse. Now, the groove itself does not contain any note information. What it contains is embedded timing information and occasionally velocity information to move these notes away from their quantized points in the grid. Now, what's great about grooves is it's a real-time sliding scale. So if you turn this off, timing here, then even though you've applied that groove, it's going to have no effect whatsoever. And you can apply as much groove as you need to in terms of percentage. So that is before the groove. That's after the groove. Very, very subtle. But where the groove comes in real handy is by adding a certain amount of random timing error. And that will have the same effect as what I've just done, you know, manually moving the hits backwards and forwards, but it'll do it randomly. And again, it's a sliding scale. If you listen very carefully, you'll start to hear the edge of that snare clap start to blur, and you'll get a nice thick sound. Like that. If I go too far, and it sounds like I'm playing the drums. But somewhere around there, an occasional hit, you know, just getting a nice little strong feel to it. What you can do down here in the bottom left is commit that groove to the clip. So that in that way we can see exactly what it's doing to it. If I commit that, you can see what it's done. It's just moved some hits forward, some hits back. And you can just, if you want to, I suppose, you could reapply that groove and just keep committing it to get the exact timing error that you're looking for. There you go, you can see it's just brought those hits forward. So that is a bit too much. Command Z. Command Z. Command Z is your friend. Undo. Right. What time are we on? Overrunning already, brilliant. Any questions on that so far? No? Let me just show you Live's brand new glue compressor. They can't say it, but I can. It's modelled on an old SSL bus compressor, which to buy the equivalent today would cost you about £1,500. And I have to say, it sounds amazing. So I'm going to go audio effects. Where is it now? Glue compressor. Let's just drop that onto the impulse there. That's what it looks like. Right, that's what glue looks like. Just have a quick listen to the sort of sounds that you can get from it. Obviously, here's your attack time, here's your release time, ratio. Start to pull the threshold back and the device will start to do some work. So I'll leave it about that and then we'll tweak with a bit of makeup gain. This button here sort of puts it into analog mode, and rather than it clipping, you get like a nice, well, what's called soft clip.
Yeah, is that the same as the saturator? It's got
a little bit, yeah, yeah. It's just gives a real nice sort of warm quality to the sound. But the brilliant thing about it, it's got a wet-dry control, so that is like doing parallel compression, but all on the same track. So if I turn that all the way to dry, it's not doing anything at all. If I turn it around to wet, obviously that is the fully compressed signal, and somewhere in the middle, you're getting a nice balance of the original transients passing through without being compressed, with the thickening quality of a compressor. I'm going to move on because otherwise I'm going to run out of time, but we're going to come back to that maybe and add a little bit of reverb to it. I might change the kick drum sample, it's a little bit pokey that. But the next thing that I would like to do is go back to the Maxi Sound System track, mute those drums for the time being. I want to make this sort of deep house bass sound. Million tracks that's in, but let's attempt to make this from scratch using analog. Somewhere there, and instruments, analog. Just drag and drop what I'll call the parent folder on, rather than any individual presets. So this gives you a blank analog onto which we can start to make some settings. So first of all, just make a MIDI clip. This is going to sound completely wooden. Let's try and emulate what he's doing there. So,